Welcome everyone to our lecture today. I'm Susan Jones and I'm the Minister here at St Andrews on the Terrace, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this lecture today. Today we're privileged to have Professor Chris Longhurst talking to us. Chris worked as a docent at the Vatican Museums and then lectured at a Moroccan university, acclaims. It links in a pair with one on Thursday, where we are celebrating the ordination of women, the first woman to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church. So we are having a week of looking at the feminine and women in general. And today, what did Leonardo and Michelangelo really think of women? Renaissance pictorial radicalism acclaims the feminine, and we'll see how Chris lets us into that mystery. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Jones. And it's a pleasure to be back here at St Andrews to look at what Leonardo and Michelangelo really thought of women, because people on the street, in the marketplace, online, and even in some scholarship, say that neither Leonardo nor Michelangelo, contemporaries of the 15th century, showed any interest whatsoever in women. This is an ambiguous conviction, not only because it reduces the meaning of interest to the level of material sexuality, but because it betrays an ignorance of their lives and their artworks, and, in my opinion, a serious lack of understanding the significance of artistic meaning. This lecture looks at a few artworks by Leonardo and Michelangelo which use women as their subject matter or have a woman at the center of attention. Taking these artworks as points of reference, it reveals these artists' attitudes towards women and the role of women in the church and in society at that time. The lecture also seeks to demonstrate that both Leonardo and Michelangelo have disclosed a more sophisticated and profound interest in women and women's roles in society and the church than the mere physical or biological, an interest which penetrates to the psychological, anthropological, and spiritual depths of femininity. Looking firstly at Leonardo's works in her book titled The Expanding Discourse, Feminism and Art History, Mary Garrard, groundbreaking feminist scholar and professor emerita of art history at the American University in Washington, D.C., states that, quote, Leonardo presented through art a view of the female sex that was culturally abnormal in the patriarchy of his day, unquote. Garrard mentions that Leonardo portrayed women as, quote, understood individually, as an intelligent being, biologically as an equal half of the human species, and philosophically as the ascendant principle of the cosmos, unquote. Furthermore, she states, Leonardo's position deserves our attention, for it was distinctive in a period when women were neither politically nor socially empowered to make such a case for themselves. Leonardo's technical innovation for painting people in general, especially his use of physiognomy. This is a term from the Greek physis, which means nature, and nomen, which means judge or interpreter. This is a quality which in art enables the viewer to know something of a person's character or personality from their outer appearance, especially the face. This quality seems to be best developed in Leonardo's portraits of women. Not only does he choose to portray women over and above men, But going beyond the traditions of his day, he reveals them as fully rounded human beings with extraordinary movement, emotion, and virtue. Let's begin with a portrait of Ginevra di Benci. Here she is, a 15th century Florentine aristocrat. This painting is much more than merely a portrait. It is a psychological and physiognomic communication. Note the expression on her face. It reveals a withdrawn sadness. Up until the 18th century, sadness in portraiture was typically conveyed through portraits of men, not women. Note the modeling of her lips and the area around her eyes. The face is soft, and to some it may seem austere. There is no hint of a smile, and her gaze, although forward, appears indifferent to the viewer. Note her skin, which is radiant, as if like the moon, it reflects an unseen light. This infers a kind of knowing, an intuitive knowledge, wisdom. Wisdom is an intellectual virtue. Like the theological and cardinal virtues, it is personified in the feminine. Leonardo is paying tribute to feminine perceptiveness. Secondly, there is movement and communication with the audience. Through the eyes, Leonardo invites you in to look at what she is looking at. Note how she turns the face to the viewer, with a serious gaze directly meeting the viewer's eyes. This simple quality alone challenges patriarchal conventions of Leonardo's time and place. Furthermore, although she is a member of a wealthy Florentine family, Leonardo depicts her in plain clothes. This detail allows the viewer to overlook her nobility and focus instead on the white alabaster smoothness of her face. Leonardo's intention was not to convey her material wealth, a purely accidental quality, but her character and her personality from her outer appearance. Yet he takes this imagery far further. The woman's real wealth is more than her physical beauty. In those days, beauty was taken to be an expression of virtue. Facial beauty in art was an embellishment of inner virtue, moral goodness. Portraying women beautifully or ideally denoted possession of a rational quality between goodness and beauty. This was well understood by the Greeks, who, fusing the two concepts, goodness and beauty, coined the term kalokagathia. On this point, Plato writes, "The power of the good has taken refuge in the nature of the beautiful." A second case is Cecilia Garinardi, the 16-year-old mistress of the Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza. This 15th century noble woman, commoner, was from a family who was neither wealthy nor noble. Her portrait is known in art history as the Lady with the Ermine. Seated in three-dimensional pose, with her face turned in the opposite direction, the viewer can feel the movement as she turns her head to face a third party. While gazing pensively towards it, she is stroking the ermine. An ermine is like a white stoat, a more prissy kind of animal that doesn't like to get its fur soiled. Her emotion is one of alluring wistfulness. Note the smile. She's also dressed commonly. However, the ermine's fur is typically used by Catholic monarchs, popes and cardinals for the mozzetta cape. The mozzetta is the garment that rests on the breast, that folds up at the back. The ermine itself is significant. Several interpretations regarding its meaning exist. However, my own is a little audacious, but one that I think should not be overlooked. Leonardo depicts the ermine in her arms, as if a pet. It is sitting in her lap. It is white, furry, muscular. Look at that muscle tone in its leg. And bony. Scholars have written about it as an allegory of purity, and also in reference to her association with her lover, Ludovico, who was a member of the Order of the Ermine. And he used this animal for his personal emblem. However, this association is far more suggestive and obvious, in my opinion. With the ermine's long snout, serpentine body, and tight musculature, it looks unmistakably phallic. And her control of it suggests that she has tamed the ermine. That is, she has tamed her master. These are only two examples of a whole range of female physiognomic portraiture by Leonardo. Moving on now to a brief analysis of his Last Supper. This is a complex historical and theological scene. Famous, I'm sure, and well known to us all. At least 2 of the 12 apostles appear feminine. Philip, and John. Though it is insufficient to conclude that Renaissance interest in male androgyny was the reason why Leonardo portrayed them effeminately. Looking purposely at the apostle on John's right, to entertain the idea that this is not John, the beloved apostle, but another beloved, provokes displeasure and even anger among some. Though note the soft and pale skin tone. Unfortunately, we're seeing this in an image on a screen. Even to see it in real life today, unfortunately, the fresco has decomposed. And this actually is a restoration work by an Italian artist of the 18th century. This is the original, a detail of it. If you can see that. Note the soft and pale skin tone. We're looking at the Apostle John. The delicate fingers in comparison to the other 12. The hands joined together, and the beardless face, and even the color schemata of the dress which complements Jesus. Jesus has a red undergarment and a blue outer garment. John has a blue undergarment and a red outer garment. They have significance which I won't go into now, but clearly there is a complementarity between John and Jesus. Though above all, note the pose. Calm, while all the other apostles are disturbed. Remember, this is that famous scene where Jesus has just told his 12 apostles that one of them is about to betray him. They are all calm, they are all disturbed, except John, who is calm. And perhaps Judas there with the money bag. Do you see the money bag here? Judas is perhaps feigning to be shocked. So anyway, the point is, there is something special about John. So what was Leonardo thinking? Let's argue that this figure is the beloved apostle. The problem is the name of the beloved apostle in the non-canonical sacred texts, that is in the apocrypha, which are the hidden books, and the pseudepigrapha, which are the falsely attributed writings, is ambiguous. Furthermore, the canonical text of the fourth Gospel of John, which bears John's name, implies that the beloved is John. However, that Gospel has been redacted. Redaction is a form of editing which combines various source texts and alters them slightly to produce a single document. Biblical scholarship does affirm that the Gospel of John has been redacted. Several scholars, based on studies of primary non-canonical texts, explain that the beloved apostle and author of the fourth Gospel was turned into a male because the emerging male leadership of the early Christian community was embarrassed about having a female founder after Jesus' death. So to normalize their situation, they suppressed the more radical practices taught by Jesus, and in the case of the fourth Gospel, changed its authorship to a male. James Robinson, writing on the Nag Hammadi texts, explains this point, as does Karen King, Harvard University Divinity School professor of ancient Christian history, and Ramon Justino, instructor of theology at Notre Dame Academy on Staten Island in New York. The point is, Leonardo da Vinci appears to support this theory, and he uses his artistic license to express it. The traditional Orthodox position is, nevertheless, that the beloved apostle is John. Leonardo implies, however, that it is not. Here we see, for example, on the right, to make a comparison, John the Beloved with Leonardo's Madonna of the Rocks. There is speculation among art critics that the same sketch was used for both the Madonna of the Rocks and Leonardo. All this affirms, of course, is male androgyny. Now, it gets exciting. Moving on to Michelangelo. Remember, Michelangelo is Leonardo's junior by about 23 years, and he is heavily under the influence of Leonardo da Vinci. In direct competition with him, though under his influence and inspired by him. And among all criticism, art historians say that one of the few men that Michelangelo respected was Leonardo da Vinci. I want to consider two of his works, The Creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and Pietà in the Basilica of St. Peter at Rome. If time permits, we can quickly look at the Last Judgment as well in the Sistine Chapel. Concerning the creation of Adam, here it is. This is obviously a pivotal scene in the biblical creation story of both Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Its pictorial rendition by Michelangelo is complex, and an entire seminar could be spent on the meaning of this one scene. Relevant to the theme today, however, note the person around whom God's left arm is extended. It is clearly a woman. And note the form around God. It is an anatomically accurate vertical cross-section of the human brain. Using the symbolism allowed in pictorial media, Michelangelo has woman, Eve, in the mind of God before God creates Adam. Why? Because the biblical narrative of Genesis 1 states that Eve was created last. Michelangelo is following a simple Platonic principle which distinguishes between physical creation and mental conception. The principle is that what is first in the order of intention is second in the order of execution. In other words, to put this simply, what you're going to do, you know of before you do it. Meaning, the virtual act is in the mind before it is carried out. Effectively, Michelangelo has removed from the unfolding of events in time the biblical creation narrative of 6 days. Michelangelo has removed from that any idea of temporal sequence and raised it, the creation, to a metaphysical transtemporal reality with the idea of it in his mind, with woman at the center of that idea. This is spectacular theology, in my opinion. It underscores the entire transtemporality of creation. More importantly, given that there is no time in eternity, the so-called finished product, Eve, woman, is present in the divine mind even before God creates Adam. I have to be careful here because remember we're speaking metaphorically. And still, from a theological point of view, there is no sequence of events in the creation, theologically speaking. But we're not looking at this theologically. Michelangelo is first and foremost an artist. He is rendering accessible to you, to a child, one of the most profound theological ideas, the creation of the human. Eve, however, woman, is as if a divine idea. Remember that Michelangelo is a Platonist. In the Platonic system, ideas are more real than objects. You are not seeing me, really, right now, because what you saw before was different, and what you'll see later will be different. Therefore, who am I? The physical object, me, is simply an illusion that undergoes change. The idea of me in your mind is real in the Platonic system. Therefore, the idea of women is in the mind of God, and that's the message that Michelangelo is trying to convey. Again, I think that this is spectacular theology. And on this score, I do not agree with feminist theologian Elizabeth Dawson Gray, who says that Michelangelo's creation of Adam, quote, was a great picture but bad theology, very bad theology, unquote. Gray says, quote, God created man in his own image. She's referring, of course, to the scriptural passage. Okay, she questions, quote, what really makes a difference was that the male of the species created God in his own image, unquote. Gray seems to be missing the metaphor. Man has not created God in his own image according to Michelangelo's fresco, because Michelangelo uses a brain to symbolize the intellect, which is a spiritual substance. Remember, we're in the 16th century. The human being is a composite of matter and spirit, whereas God is a pure spirit. And how do you paint a purely spiritual substance? That is the question for an artist. Therefore, it is not an image of man, of a human person per se, but a brain to symbolize God, a spiritual substance, a mind, the divine intellect, the creative principle. Furthermore, Gray continues, so actually the energy of creation went up rather than down. No, I disagree. The energy in Michelangelo's creation is not directed upwards. In semiology, up is masculine. You know those symbols that we often look at. The symbol of the male is up. Down is feminine. Likewise, in semiology, the heavens up are masculine. The earth down is feminine. Looking at the fresco, man is static. Look at him. Look at Adam. There's no movement in Adam. He is static, laying on the earth, listfully looking up towards his creator, while God, with woman in his mind, is dynamic, dashing through the heavens with his arm outstretched, about to touch the finger of Adam. Note what Adam is lying on again. He is lying on the earth. God's creative energy is therefore directed towards the earth, towards Adam, towards the feminine. But it gets better. Another interpretation, if you look again, is that the woman around whom God's arm is extended personifies wisdom. Alan Davis, professor of biblical studies and practical theology at Duke University Divinity School, makes this point. Davis suggests that the verbal portrait of wisdom in the Bible from the Book of Wisdom may have inspired Michelangelo's female figure. In her commentary on Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs, Davis writes, quote, "In the famous scene where the spark of life passes from God's finger to Adam's, there appears at God's side a lovely young woman with eyes alert, her knee bent, poised for action. God's non-creating hand is thrown around her shoulders in a casual but intimate gesture. The woman is sometimes identified as Eve, but the contrast between her and the delicate beauty and the coarse figure of Michelangelo's Eve, which I'll show you shortly, is pronounced. It is far more likely that this, the most convincing feminine portrait he ever painted, is wisdom, the master worker sharing God's excitement and delight in the fresh new world," unquote. Davis' account is, for me, appealing because it links the idea of woman back to the notion of divine knowledge in the mind of God. God creates with wisdom. I think every religious tradition makes this point, certainly the three Abrahamic ones. And remember again, wisdom is an intellectual virtue, like cardinal virtue and theological virtue personified in the feminine. Though, despite the fact that I do like Davis's point, I believe that theologically and artistically it is limited because Michelangelo's Eve, in the physical creation of Eve, there she is. As Adam is asleep, God compels woman from the side of man, and his rendition of Eve under the fig tree, both of these Eves are corporeal, are more corporeal than the woman in the mind, because here Eve, woman, is a physical body, a material corpus. Davis doesn't make this point. Whereas Eve in the mind of God is less corporeal because she is an idealized thought, an idea. How do you render the difference between a body and an idea? Well, make one corporeal, make the other non-corporeal or less corporeal. Remember, Michelangelo is an artist and a humanist artist conforming to the Platonic philosophy, which presents ideas as more real than objects. And again, how does an artist portray an idea? Well, put it in the mind or in the brain as a mental material locus of the mind. In the end, however, whether the woman in God's mind is Eve or wisdom, it really doesn't matter, because clearly that figure is feminine. Either way, for Michelangelo, she is clearly no afterthought at the periphery of God's creative plan. She is not the end sum. No, she is a transcendent idea outside of time in the eternal mind, and that is Michelangelo's profoundest insight, a pictorial rendition of divine wisdom as feminine. Furthermore, and it gets even better, which I should go back to the creation narrative, there is another interpretation that the form around God is, if you look again, a placenta. And note Adam's navel. This is controversial because Adam was not born of a biological mother. He was taken from the dust of the earth and fashioned by God. So God is the parental unit of Adam, but Adam has a navel. Simply in religious art history, Adam was purposely not painted with a navel in medieval art to make this point. Remember, art is not biology, and neither is it history. It is art. Adam has a navel. And look again, woman, Eve, see this bluish green thing here, which carries on down here? Her veil, see it here? Eve's veil, woman's veil, which Michelangelo transforms into an umbilical cord, if this is the placenta, connecting God and man, Adam, on a biological level, implying, obviously, that God is the mother of man. That God gave birth to man. And remember, this is my interpretation. You're welcome to disagree with it. There are many interpretations here. Look again at the umbilical cord, at the navel of Adam. Remember, Michelangelo is dissecting cadavers that he got from morgues. It was highly illegal. But he was getting them from Leonardo, actually. The Medici closed an eye to this. It was wrong. It was illegal, but it was going on. If you look again here, and again, you're welcome to disagree with this, but it's an interpretation of a form which is not a navel, but a vagina. The point is, Michelangelo is giving the biology of the male feminine characteristics. The question becomes why? In other words, simply he's mixing up biology and theology and mixing up gender characteristics. I would say that Michelangelo is not being a feminist here, but rather just a spectacular artist who renders one of theology's most complicated ideas accessible to us all. Finally, a quick look at Pietà. Here it is, Pietà. A marble sculpture which Michelangelo considered to be his greatest work. This is a double life-size Carrara marble sculpture in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Michelangelo sculpted it when he was 23, finished it when he was 24 in 1499. He lived to be 89 and referred back to this work as his "that which I have done no better," his masterpiece. My point is, Michelangelo, despite what we say about David and what we say about the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo thinks that this is his masterpiece, which he achieved at the age of 24. It is not a Christ-centered work of art. It is a Marian work of art. It is centered on Mary. This portrays that moment when the body of Jesus was taken down from the cross and placed in the arms of his mother. Therefore, in the arms of a woman. It is centered on Mary, therefore on a woman. She is strong. Note the hands. It's a shame you can't see the hand here, but in real life, if you were to see this, it has been critiqued as masculine. The hand is not touching the body. Really quickly, this artwork is conforming to the canons of perfection of polykleitos, meaning it has full visibility. You could walk around it and see it. We're looking at it from the front. It has full visibility, it has emotion, it has movement. It's almost like theatre in stone. But the point is, look at the hand. The hand is not touching the body and it's masculine. Look at her broad shoulders. They're robust. Look at her legs. They're open. She is seated in a pose with the legs wide open, conveying strength. Clearly, we are not looking at a Hebrew mother who would be wailing at the thought of receiving the dead body of her son into her arms. Michelangelo has depicted a high Renaissance Roman woman. Look at her dress, all that cloth, about to enclose the body symbolically, as if her womb becomes the tomb of the receiving back of the soul. But Michelangelo is far more ambiguous. She is not holding on to the body. If you look again, this arm is propped up underneath the armpit of the corpse. This arm is not touching the body. If you look carefully, the muscles are drawn back, suggesting a movement forward. Follow the movement through in your mind. She is letting go. She is physically giving up the body. To whom? Well, to us right now, because there it is. If you were present on site, she would be giving up the body to you. What does this mean? She becomes, in Michelangelo's mind, a priest, a minister of Holy Communion. I'm probably not talking to a majority of a Catholic audience, but remember, this is all taking place in the Roman Catholic tradition, which has the greatest problems with female ministry. And there Michelangelo has the woman giving up the body of Christ to the audience. Better still, pietà means sorrow. Look at her face. Objectively, look at her face. She appears to be serene and at peace, devoid of sorrow. There is a pensiveness about her face. Rather than the sorrowful mother, Michelangelo has trapped in stone that verse from Luke's Gospel where he says she ponders all these things in her heart. She is pondering. She is not sad because she is pondering what? Well, in her wisdom, she knows that her son does not die. He suffers death, though is resurrected and glorified, therefore Mary is never sad. All of a sudden, this woman takes on an extraordinary metaphysical, intellectual context, similar to how Leonardo portrays his women. Intellectually strong, with strength of character. Returning to the masculine insinuations of the woman, remember again, Michelangelo is an artist. How do you personify strength? Well, in my opinion, make her strong, physically. That's all. It's a metaphor for an interior strength, a strength of character, a fortitude, the strength of a woman to receive the body of her own son dead into her arms. How do you trap this in marble? Ask Michelangelo. Even if some critics refrain from praising this artwork for not possessing traditional feminine qualities, listen quickly to what artist David Maidman says about Michelangelo's Pietà. Maidman asks, quote, "Of which property of femininity does this Mary not partake? In physicality, she shows the soft curve of the jaw, the rounded cheeks, the oval face, the fine features, the luminous eyes. In character, she shows subfusion with emotion, pride in form, perception, self-possession. And in circumstance, she shows both maternal love and grief, and that awful maternal capacity to sustain them, the agony and ability to survive it which characterizes mothers alone," unquote. Furthermore, Michelangelo's artistic technique in Pietà allows the viewer to study woman, to admire woman, to admire her strength and to become familiar with her from the noblest position of not needing to possess her, to subjugate her, to make her conform. He gives all viewers the opportunity to appreciate woman without envy or without lusting after her beauty. He allows the audience to encounter her from the attitude of disinterested love, which is, as Peter Abelard explains, a necessary precursor to the highest form of love. Finally, look at what she is sitting on. Again, it is a shame that we can't walk around this or view it from different angles, but look at what she is sitting on. And you see it so well at the bottom and around the side too. What is she sitting on? A rock. Super hanc petram edificabit ecclesiam meam. On this rock I will build my church. A quote from St. Matthew's Gospel. Traditionally, that rock is referred to Peter and the faith of Peter. Peter, Petrus, means rock. Peter's name in Hebrew is Simoni bar Jonah. Jesus says, "Simon, son of John, tu eis Petrus, you are the rock, et super hanc petram, and on this rock I will build my church." Michelangelo has the woman sitting on the rock. And therefore, the church. This is his mater ecclesia, mother church. The foundation of the Christian community for Michelangelo becomes a woman. And look at what she is doing. Giving us again the body of God. Finally, obviously, this is a spectacular drama. Michelangelo refers to his sculptures as theatre in stone. You're not supposed to sit back or stand in front and admire this. You're supposed to participate in it. He's supposed to invite you in to somehow participate in the event. Finally, from a physical, biological perspective, the woman, Mary, could not possibly be the mother of the man she is holding. She is simply too young. This is Michelangelo's faith. Mary never gets old in Michelangelo's mind because she was not subject to sin. This is his ability to portray what the Catholic tradition calls the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. Mary was not subject to sin, therefore she did not suffer the consequences of sin, which is getting old and dying. Therefore Michelangelo traps her as young. That's a theological interpretation. It could simply be his canon of perfection as the idealized woman. It could be his own mother, the idealization of his own mother who he never knew. Or it could be Freud's interpretation of his Oedipus complex. It doesn't matter. There are many ways of interpreting this. The fact is, she never gets old because she is not subject to sin. So finally, what can we learn from this brief introduction to these few works by Leonardo and Michelangelo? Their interest in women. I think that these artworks can inspire us today to be more enlightened, to be more accepting of difference, and most of all, to be encouraged by the possibility of gender equality. Though perhaps, more than anything else, we can learn that when words fail to express a significant idea, then art can convey that idea powerfully through an image, a single and silent image. Thank you.